Hello everyone, welcome to another interesting and informative session of the Analyst brought to you by Vajiram and Ravi. In today's session, we will discuss 9 important articles as featured in the Hindu and Indian Express for your comprehensive understanding of the current affairs. The topics are as follows. In the first topic, we'll try to examine the need of increasing cooperation between the global South countries and the role of India as its emerging leader. In the second topic, in the wake of the heinous crime which has taken place in the state of Bengal, we will try to examine the need of a Central Protection Act for healthcare workers. Then in the third topic, we'll try to assess that whether the Make in India initiative has been a success or a failure. Followed by the fourth topic, we'll try to assess the reliability of the weather forecast data released by the Indian Meteorological Department. And finally, in the fifth topic, we'll try to learn about a new scheme which has been launched called as Rattirer Sathi. Towards the end, there will be news snippets especially curated to help you in the prelims examination as well, so stay tuned. India on 17th of August virtually hosted the third Voice of Global South Summit, highlighting the importance of South-to-South cooperation. This idea of India emerging as a voice of the global South countries forms an important component of your GS2 paper under the theme of groupings and agreements which involves our countries and affect our countries' interest. Now, this Global South Summit, which was the third such initiative taken by our country. Before this, 2 previous summits has been taken place. This Global South Summit is actually the expansion of the idea of our Honorable Prime Minister. The idea of Sabka Saath, Sabka Vikas, Sabka Vishwas and Sabka Prayas, which basically underpins the epithet of Vasudev Kutumbakam. This initiative basically aims to just bring the global South countries, which includes the developing and the underdeveloped nations, to share the preparedness and priorities on a common platform where the range of such issues are discussed. For example, the global conflicts which are taking place. And because of that global conflicts, the food and energy security crisis, which is becoming a challenge for these countries, the climate change which is actually impeding the development of these countries, as well as terrorism, extremism and separatism, which was actually highlighted by our Prime Minister in the third summit, and the technology divide which has taken place between the developed and the developing nations. What was the theme of this third summit? The theme was an empowered global South for the sustainable future. Now keep this in mind that there were previous 2 summits which were also virtually hosted by our country. First in the month of January 2023 and the second in the month of November 2023, where more than 100 plus countries actually participated, and the issues which they raised form the integral component of our G20 New Delhi Declaration of 2023. Because in G20, who was the president? Us as our country, right? So now, in this declaration, there was the increasing call for South-to-South cooperation. So now, basically, we have reached to a stage where 2 important questions are occurring in our mind. The first is that what is this concept of Global South? And the second is that why our country is putting so much of an effort to increase such a coalition? Let's try to answer them one by one. The first is, what is Global South? The term Global South was actually coined by Carl Oglesby in the year of 1969, the time period when the Vietnam War was taking place, which took place between 1955 to 1975, where US was actually trying to curb the forces of socialism in the year or in the country of Vietnam. Now, at that time, there were certain countries, including our country, which did not took any side, which was not the part of either the bloc of USA or the bloc of USSR. Thus, according to the Carl Oglesby, there are countries who are actually just focusing upon their development, and they are the grouping of non-aligned developing countries. This is basically the core idea of the non-aligned movement, which was launched by our country. Then, there was another term which was frequently in the use before this concept of Global South, and that was Third World Countries, which was actually coined by Alfred Sauvy in the year of 1950. So, which are the first world countries? The rich US and its European friends. Which are the second world countries? The USSR and its socialist allies. And there were third world countries which were not aligned with any of these blocs. Now, this term of third world countries actually started gaining much more traction after the disintegration of the USSR in the year of 1991, where the Western media actually started painting the picture of these third world countries, the countries which are facing political instability, which are basically deprived of resources, thus the result of which they are underdeveloped, and at the same time there is mass poverty which is riding these countries and just holding their growth prospect. Thus, that is why the developing nations, including India, started adopting or using more frequently the term of Global South as a more neutral narrative. And that led to the emergence of the grouping of 77 countries. Keep this in mind, that this G77 grouping, which headquarter is in the Geneva, Switzerland. Currently, it has 134 members, including the prominent members such as, for example, India, China, the African continent, the whole Caribbean island and the South American countries. Thus, another question is that, okay, are these countries are only or solely being decided upon the groupings which they are part of? The answer is no. They are also categorized on the basis of economic classification or Brandt line. So basically, the Brandt line just basically divides the countries on the basis of high income and low income countries. So the Brandt line just goes like this. These are the countries which are have the virtue of being the high income countries, and these are the countries which are basically categorized by the low income countries. So the rich countries or the global north basically consist of the Europe, the USA and its allies such as, for example, Australia. The global south basically comprises of India, China, Russia, the African continent and the South American countries as well. Now, when we have understood the concept of global south, let's first try to understand that what was the need of such grouping at first place. So try to imagine yourself as a parent who has got two kids. The one kid is actually quite brilliant in academics, and because of the virtue of which he just clears the UPSC examination. So now he has got a future stability, especially in the terms of economic prosperity. However, there is another child who is not much more focused upon the studies, rather he wastes his time making reels on social media. So as a parent, it is obviously your responsibility to take care or give extra attention to this underdeveloped child. And that underdeveloped child is nothing but the global south or the countries with low income. So let's try to understand this by doing a comparison between the global north and the global south. The global north has got the 25% of the world population, but keep this in mind, as per the World Inequality Lab report, it has got 75% of the world's wealth. In comparison to that, the global south has got a magnanimous 75% of the population, with India and China itself having 2/3 of the population. However, we have got only 25% of the world's wealth. The average life expectancy in the global north is more than 70 years. However, it just averages around 50 years in the global south. In the global north, obviously there is prosperity. So most of the people there are nutritious. They are getting good food to eat. At the same time, as per the Global Hunger Index of 2023, 20% of the population in the global south actually suffers from acute hunger. Then in the global north, obviously most of the people have got the access to high quality education. On the other hand, in the south, average like around 50% only have got access to certain higher degrees. Then obviously there is the concept of brain drain, where the intelligent brains of our country are actually being drained by the foreign countries. How many people, they actually just clear the ITs, but still they just want to settle down abroad, and they actually adopt for higher education in these global north countries. Then 90% of the world's manufacturing industry lies in the global north. Obviously, they have got 90% of the total spending on research and development. However, when we talk about the global south, it has got only 10% of the world's manufacturing industry, and it spends only 10% on research and development, thus further limiting the future growth prospect, which is going to be based upon the Industry 4.0. Then, another argument for the need of formation of such coalition is first the economic reason. And that is because the increasing inequality. Just look at the World Inequality Lab report data here. The richest 10% in the world around owns 60 to 80% of the wealth, while the poorest half just have got 5% of the wealth, 50% of the population. That is also visible from the data if you look that the MENA countries, which is basically the Middle East and North African countries, have the highest inequality share, and the lowest inequality share is in the region of Europe. So when there is such an extreme poverty at one hand and such extreme luxury at one hand, what it will lead to? As we can recall here, the dictum of Lord Krishna, as he propounds in Bhagavad Gita, that the crime takes place because there is someone who has got nothing. And that is why the cases of theft take place. So basically, this high level of inequality between the developed nations and the developing and underdeveloping countries has actually led to several issues. For example, how frequently you read about any conflict or coup or dictatorship which is taking place in the regions of Africa. Or for example, the issue of outward migration which is being done from the African region and they are fleeing to the countries of America or Europe. Obviously, if you will talk about these people, if you will hear to their narratives in various channels, this claim that, because of this industrial revolution which took place and the slavery which was imposed upon them and the colonialism which took place, so now because you kept them deprived of resources for such a long time, now it is their right to reclaim their right on resources. Then the second need is the food and energy security crisis. So because of the policies of the developed nation, it is basically the developing nations which are suffering the most. For example, because of the Russia-Ukraine war, the global supply chain disruption which was caused, or for example, the trade protectionist policies which are being adopted by the developed nations right now, especially after the COVID pandemic. The third is the geopolitical tension. So let's recall the most easiest and the recent one, for example, the Houthi attacks which were taking place in the region of Red Sea. So because of which all the supply chain disruptions which is taking place, it is actually making the poorer countries more deprived of resources. The third is that obviously these are the countries which are prone to the impact of climate change. The climate change induced flash flood, flash drought, the extreme weather events. For example, just look at the data here that which are the countries which are most affected by the rising sea level. Can we just see the reflection of all the global south here, especially including our country as well? Then there is obviously, let's say, even if all these difficulties are being imposed upon these nations, are they financially capable to deal with these emerging challenges? The answer is absolutely no. And what does that lead to? That lead to that either these countries are falling into the debt trap. So for example, you can just see the increasing Chinese takeover in the region of Africa. Just look at their increasing percentage of imports which these African countries are doing from China. Or for example, just look at the huge investments which China is making in several countries such as, for example, Chad, Sudan, Uganda, Kenya, Mozambique, even South Africa, or the countries such as, for example, Nigeria, the Democratic Republic of Congo. Now either these countries are falling in these debt traps, or for example, just remember your role as a parent. So you should have taken the responsibility of the development of these nations. But what you are doing, you are running away from the responsibilities. So for example, if we look at the CO2 emission, obviously the two most prominent CO2 emitters are USA and China. Then there are countries who, because of the industrial revolution, has this historic responsibility of increasing the CO2 emission in the world, especially after the industrial revolution period. So because of which the global warming is taking place, and the impact of global warming in the form of climate change is already visible, which is affecting whom the most? The global south. But these countries, they are not taking the responsibility. For example, we are still not able to finance the whole idea which we were envisaged under the Paris Agreement, where these countries were asked to donate at least $100 billion a year for the climate adoption and mitigation strategies which shall be adopted by these global south region. Just look at the amount which has paid by the United States of America and even the meager share of the other countries, which you can actually quote in your answers as well. And even the kind of finance which they are providing, they are mostly in the form of loans and not in the form of grants. So obviously this is another phase of the debt trap policy. The next is that most of these countries has started adopting the first or the developed first policy, where if we just look at the United Nations national security documents, it actually talks about or give the priority to these four causes. The first is curbing China's rise in the Indo-Pacific, weakening of the Russia in Europe, securing the European countries behind the US leadership, obviously under the North Atlantic Treaty Organization and its expansion, which is ultimately one of the causes of Russia-Ukraine war. And then the trade policies of reshoring and friendshoring. What is reshoring is basically that only, let's say, if you are going to buy from me a 100 rupees product, only then I am going to buy from you, let's say, a 80 rupees product. So that is friendshoring or reshoring concept. So now when these developed countries are giving the priorities to their development at the cost of the developing nation, shall there be a coalition which shall be formed among these developing nations? Obviously. The next reason is the dominance-led exclusion. So these developed nations, because of the virtue of having accumulated a lot of resources, they have started leading to the exclusion of the developing nations from the path of the development. For example, the refusal of the West to grant one-time exception for the patent of COVID vaccine, which actually forced the South African president to lament that during the time of COVID, I was actually feeling like a beggar for the vaccine availability. The next is the domination of Bretton Woods institutions, for example, the International Monetary Fund or the World Bank. So you guys can actually recall at this stage the kind of crisis which took place in Kenya because of the IMF-led development policies there. So IMF had provided loan to Kenya, and then it says that now you have to restructure your economy, you have to increase the taxes. That ultimately led to the public uprising there. Is India actively participating and taking steps to curb such dominance? Obviously. So for example, India is trying to weaken this Bretton Woods institutions hold by adopting for rupee and ruble trade between Russia. We are also trying for the de-dollarization of the economy. At the same time, we also launched the Vaccine Matri initiative, which we are going to see. The second perspective is that such coalitions shall be formed because there is a shift in the economic and political power, and that is towards the global south. Because these are the countries with the increasing purchasing power because of the virtue of the demography we have got. So where most of the internet will be consumed in the global south, where most of the products will be brought in the global south. So obviously when we have got this purchasing power, why we shall not dictate the manufacturing capacities as well? Then obviously just look at the rise of these BRICS countries. These BRICS countries, which include the Russia, Brazil, India, China and South Africa, they have already surpassed the GDP of the G7 or the developed countries already. Then there is also the expanding footprint of the BRICS in the global south. So earlier there were these 5 countries. Now there were 4 other members which has been included. For example, Iran, United Arab Emirates, Ethiopia. And then there is another country which has been included in this initiative as of January 1, 2024. Just name that country in the comment box. And we will now try to understand that how India has emerged as the emerging leader or as the voice of the global south. Because we have launched several initiatives to support these underdeveloped and developing nations. For example, we launched Vaccine Matri, which was a humanitarian assistance launched during the time of pandemic, where we provided the vaccines to more than 100+ countries. Or for example, we launched Supply Chain Resilience Initiative, an initiative which includes Japan, Australia and India, where we are just trying to create enough supply chain infrastructure in the region of Indo-Pacific to actually curb the impact of China in that region. Then we have also launched the International Solar Alliance, where we are just envisaging for energy security in the form of creating solar power grid and connecting the countries. The fourth is the Global South Science and Technology Initiative, which was taken during the G20 presidentship, and during the same presidentship, we also included the African Union in the G20. Then there is a Asia-Africa Growth Corridor, which has been launched by India and Japan to actually tackle the debt trap policy being played by China. Then there is Information Fusion Center in the Indian Ocean region, where we are just actually trying to create security net and secure the supply chains. We are trying to curb down the issues such as, for example, illegal fishing or the drug trafficking which take place between these developing and underdeveloped nations or the small island states specifically. We have also launched Sagar initiatives and Colombo Security Clave to enhance our role as net security provider. Now, during the third Voice of Global South Summit 2024, the Prime Minister launched another initiative, that is Global Development Compact, where under this Global Development Compact, the Prime Minister said that it is going to become the voice to those who have been unheard till now. And we are going to focus on which aspect? On trade and development, technology sharing. And remember that under this Global Development Compact, the project-specific concessional finance and grants will be provided as well, for the purpose of which a special fund of $2.5 million will be created by India. In our last summit, we had launched the Global Deposit Repository, where we are just trying to do this technology sharing, and we are sharing our digital initiatives such as, for example, Aadhaar card, DigiLocker, Uniform Payment Interference, e-sign and e-KYC with these developing nations. So remember these important initiatives which has been launched by India, especially to help the Global South, and try to address this particular question. If possible, comment your answer in the comment box, and we move forward to the next news. The resident doctors across India are on strike, demanding the laws to ensure their safety in the light of a heinous incident which took place in R.G. Kar Medical College in the state of West Bengal, thus bringing in the issue of the need for a Central Protection Act to protect the healthcare professionals, which forms an important component of your GS2 paper under the theme of social justice and the issues related to the development and management of health sector. This incident, which has shook the conscience of the nation, has taken place just a decade after the Nirbhaya case of 2013. So in the light of this, let's try to examine the ground reality or the increasing case of violence against the healthcare professionals. And what can be the more hard-hitting story than the case study of Aruna Ramchandra Shawnbag? Miss A.R. Shawnbag, who was working as a healthcare professional in the Edward Memorial College in the year of 1973, where she was sexually assaulted by the sweeper in the hospital, which ultimately led her to be in a vegetative state for almost 43 years, where she ultimately died in the year of 2015. Now, are these violent cases against the healthcare professionals has become a repeated occurrence? The answer is yes. If we look at the data published by the Indian Medical Association, just look at the number of cases or the direct victims of violence which has been done against the healthcare professionals. Keep this in mind that almost 600 workers were actually killed because of the wounds. 50% of the attack actually took place within the targeted healthcare facilities. And obviously, all these incidents has actually led to a huge psychological impact on the doctors. For example, just look here that how 82% of the doctors in India actually feel that they are stressed out in their position. 46% actually fears of any kind of violence. And 68% of the doctors are unable to see their patients without any fear of violence. Also, there is an increasing workload among the doctors as well. Just keep this in mind, because now we are going to discuss a reason for that why such violence take place. First is obviously the inadequate resources and infrastructure in our country. You can also quote this in any health sector data or related question in your mains examination. So, if you look at the countries with the densities of the doctor, just look at the number of doctors which India has per 1000 inhabitants, and just compare ourselves with other developing countries, even your China and Russia. Now, because we only have got 0.9 out of doctors out of 1000 patients actually, that means what? That these doctors, first of all, they are going to be busy or be working for very long hours, as we can see from here, that 56% of the doctors, they do not get comfortable 7 hours of week, obviously. The second is obviously that if you are going to these doctors as a patient, there will be a long hours of wait which can take place. Obviously, these doctors will not be able to provide you immediate attention. even if they are dealing with patient, they are in so much of a hurry that many of the times they do not actually adequately address the issue which is being faced by the patient. Then, okay, if there exists the doctor, even that is good, but what if the doctors are completely absent? Just look at the amount of vacancy which actually lies in various sections, for example, surgeons, physicians, pediatricians, as per the data published by the community healthcare centers. So there is obviously a lot of vacancy. All of these issues, if we just combine, just imagine yourself as a patient who has taken your ill parent to these hospitals. First of all, there can be chances that the doctors are not there. If the doctors are there, there are long working hours or the adequate treatment which you get for your ill parents, what that will actually further accelerate inside you, that is the kind of violence which you will feel against the failure of system, and that you will perpetrate among whom? The first responder, and that is either the nurses or the doctors. The third reason is the negligence by the healthcare professionals itself. So because now we are just trying to assess both the sides of the coins. So just look at the various complaints which has been come against the private hospitals as well as public hospitals, where these doctors are being charged due to the medical negligence or the lack of communication, the unnecessary treatments, as well as the issue of fake degrees or called as quack doctors. Then there is obviously the issue of lack of security measures, which has been highlighted by today's article as well. So what happens is that the regulation of this healthcare sector actually falls under the state list in your 7th schedule. And till now, only 19 states have implemented any kind of healthcare worker protection laws. So there exists a complete absence of central laws when it comes to the protection of healthcare workers. Also, the central government has very recently submitted that it does not maintain any detail of the number of fatalities caused within these healthcare professionals because of the attacks by the patients. Then if you just look at the medical colleges, so there were various testimony in today's article about from the various doctors who said that how in these medical colleges there are ill-lit corridors, the poorly secured wards, or the long distances between the various departments, etc., thus further exacerbating the issue of security, especially for the women. Now, is there any economic cost for this workplace violence as well? Yes, absolutely. So for example, 54% of the doctors are actually considering to quit such violent spaces at workplace. There is 112 hours of sick disability and leave time which is used by these workers who has experienced such traumatic experiences. Then 20% of healthcare workers have already quit their jobs because of this violence which is perpetrated against the healthcare workers. And all of that ultimately leads to the loss of $53 million per year because of the absence of these doctors from the workplace. Thus, there lies an immediate need for a Central Protection Act. What the government has done recently? So the government has adopted, as highlighted in a very famous book called as Trumpets and Bugles, written on the bureaucracy of our country, the government has taken the calamity occurred, action triggered approach, where the government has done what? When during the COVID pandemic time, so you guys can recall that how during the COVID pandemic time, the doctors and the nurses were actually being attacked. So the government actually brought an amendment to the Epidemic Disease Act, and it introduced certain provisions. For example, that now it made the violence against the medical staff as a non-bailable offense. It said that now if, let's say, I am a patient and I have attacked the doctor, I will have to provide the compensation to him. Then any such investigation shall be done within the 30 days, as well as the punishment was increased now to 3 months to 5 years if any healthcare professional is attacked. Now recently, in the wake of the case which has taken place in the West Bengal, the government has said that the head of the all government hospitals across the country shall register FIR within the 6 hours of any incident of such violence. But is this adequate measures? Absolutely not. So obviously there are certain steps which shall be taken. First is obviously that we shall again bring the Healthcare Service Personal Protection Bill 2019, which was brought in the parliament, but then it was completely elapsed. The second is to create fast-track courts to provide immediate justice to the victims. The third is that we shall actually adopt UK's zero tolerance policy of any such attack against the healthcare professionals, because these are the people who are actually saving our lives by risking their lives on daily basis. The next is that there shall be a personal safety training program, and especially for the women, so that they can actually safeguard themselves from this heinous situations. Obviously, instead of training the women, the more important part is that actually we should train the youth of our future. We should actually impart certain values which we have lost very long back from our ancient culture, the most basic one being providing the respect to the woman. On the basis of this discussion, just try to solve this particular question. If possible, comment your answer in the comment box and we move forward to the next news. The Ministry of Commerce data actually showcases that how India has continued dependence on China for imports in electronic sector, and thus raising an important question that this Make in India initiative which was launched by the government, that is either a success or a failure. This Make in India initiative forms an important component of your GS3 paper under the larger theme of industrial growth and policy. Let's first try to understand what is this initiative of Make in India, which was launched in the year 2014, and it is administered by the Department for Promotion for Industry and Internal Trade, which works under the Ministry of Commerce. The aim was to make our country a global manufacturing and investment destination, and especially to curb down our import dependence on other countries. Now let's try to understand the features of these Make in India. So there were certain salient objectives. So now we'll first read the objectives and then we will try to analyze that whether we have met these objectives or not. The first objective was that we were focusing to increase our manufacturing growth at least 12 to 14% per annum. So let's say if the total value addition by the manufacturing sector was 100 rupees in the year of 2014, we were saying that now we are just going to increase the revenue from the manufacturing sector to 114 rupees by the year of 2015. Just like this, it will further increase up to 130 rupees by the year of 2016. That was our idea. The second was to increase the share of manufacturing sector in GDP up to 25% by the year of 2022 itself. The third was to create 100 million additional jobs by the year of 2022 and to promote an export-led growth. Because if you look at the Ministry of Commerce, it envisages under the export policy that by the year of 2030, our exports shall reach up to $1 trillion. Now, what we were actually performing under this particular initiative of Make in India? To facilitate investors for investment, to provide synergies in investment and related incentive various policies, also for the timely clearance from the department and ministries, thus to reduce down the red tapeism which existed. Now, whether Make in India has been a success or not, let's try to analyze that. So obviously, in the last decade, we have actually become the 5th largest economy in the whole world in the terms of nominal GDP. Then India has the 3rd largest consumer market. We have also given the further impetus to various sectors of manufacturing, for example, creating the 4th largest network of rail length, 2nd largest road network. Because of all of this, we have also become the 3rd largest pharmaceutical industry, the 1st largest vaccine producer, 2nd largest mobile handset manufacturing in the world, 3rd largest market volume in the terms of automobile industry. We are also further doing quite good in the terms of chemical industry. Just look at us in the food processing. Just look at the defense sector as well, the kind of impetus which we provided under the Atma Bharat initiative, where we just try to keep or make ourselves self-reliant in the defense sector. Also remember, for all the students who are giving mains examination this year, that these are the datas which can actually become your introduction or enrich your answers. So you can just take the screenshot of this data set. But the argument goes, as highlighted by the today's editorial, that is that there are certain shortcomings in Make in India. And for that purpose, we are specifically going to focus upon the case study of electronics sector. where as per the data which has been provided by the Ministry of Commerce itself for the fiscal year of 2023 to 2024, we are still importing around $12 billion of electronic components from China, and just look how it has increased from the previous years, and almost $6 billion from Hong Kong, which these imports from these two countries actually forms almost 50% of our total imports in the electronic sector itself, which is around $34 billion. So obviously, when we are claiming that we have become the second largest mobile handset manufacturing in the world, at the same time for most of the electronic components, for example the semiconductor chips, we are actually import dependent. Also, remember the objectives which we had taken here. Let's try to analyze that from using the data from Budget 2024 and Economic Survey. The first is the share of manufacturing sector. What we were envisaging, 25% of GDP by 2022, where we have reached 17% of GDP as per Budget 2024. Then the total number of job created in the last whole decade was actually 12.5 crore jobs as per the Economic Survey. But that too, a lot of these jobs has been actually created in the informal sector of our economy, which comprises 90% of our total economy or the total job creation. Then if you look at the Purchasing Manager Index, India's manufacturing activity has actually slipped or shrink down to 57.5 in May 2024. Thus, it means that despite all the impetus which we have given to the manufacturing sector in our country, the manufacturing sector has not registered the similar kind of growth. So what are the steps which shall be taken to further promote the Make in India initiative? There are several steps which has been taken by the government for the fruition of this. The first is obviously the production linked incentive scheme which was launched by the government. So it has been launched for various sectors, for example the textiles, the chemicals, the food processing industry has been included as well. Then we have also launched under this PLI scheme the manufacturing of semiconductor chips as well. Then the government launched the PM Gati Shakti program, where we are just trying to increase our logistics to further provide impetus on manufacturing. So for example, we are going to just bring down at particular one platform the various initiatives such as, for example, Bharatmala, Sagarmala, the Udan initiative, the special economic zones and railways, and we are going to integrate this logistic along with the various industrial corridors which the government is creating. Then the government has also brought several foreign direct investment reforms in various sectors. For example, even in the defense, earlier there were only 49% of FDI which was allowed, but now the government has increased it to 74%. To further increase such investment, the government has created a particular special cell called as Investor Facilitation Cell as well. All of these initiatives has actually led to increase in the ease of doing business in our country. So for example, as per the ease of doing business report which was being launched by World Bank, we had significantly improved our ranks in several years. However, the report has now been discontinued. Keep this in mind. The next is that to increase the manufacturing, we also require the skilled workers to meet the needs of Industry 4.0. So for that skilling purpose, the government came up with the Pradhan Mantri Kaushal Vikas Yojana. To further provide the impetus to the startups, we got Startup India, and we also launched a One District, One Product initiatives as well. So just remember these initiatives and use them specifically in your GS3 answers wherever possible. Also try to attempt this particular question, and we move forward to the next news, where the article actually highlights how the forecasts which are provided by the Indian Meteorological Department are not always accurate and actually provide reason for such possible failures. This whole forecasts which are done by the Indian Meteorological Department forms an important component of your GS3 paper under the theme of space technology, and under your GS1 paper under the theme of various geophysical phenomena. Let's first try to understand how the mechanism of this forecasting actually works. Before that, let's just try to have a quick overview about the Indian Meteorological Department, which was actually created in the year of 1875. It works under which ministry? Under the Ministry of Earth and Science, and its headquarters is located in New Delhi region. Now just look how the IMD collects the data, and all that data is actually stored in the region of New Delhi. So for example, there are various agro-meteorological field units in which the IMD has divided the country. In these agro-meteorological fields, there are district agricultural officers or state government officers who actually provide this data from the ground level. So there is a preparation of district medium range weather, which is done by the State Met Center. Then there is preparation of district specific agro advisories of concerned agroclimatic zones. And all of this data is actually further filtrated down to the farmers, or the dissemination of data take place through media, personal contact, services, etc. Keep this in mind that very recently the government has launched a portal to just give all of these data to the farmers related to the fertilizer section. Can you just name what is the name of that portal in the comment box? Now, when we have understood that how these data are actually being collected at the local level and then it is being transferred to IMD and farmers, or the lower level dissemination is taking place, how IMD actually collects this data? It collects this data by using various kind of radars, for example, INSAT 3DR, the red, green, blue imager with which it actually just calculate how much is the reflectiveness of the sunlight. The third is the automatic weather stations which are created at various places. The global satellites, such as for example use of the NASA satellites, or the Doppler weather radar systems. So this is how the collection of the data and the dissemination of the data is done by IMD, with which IMD actually makes predictions. Predictions, for example, let's say the prediction for how much rain is going to take place this year. So for this year, 2024, IMD prediction says that there will be 106% of long period average rainfall in our country, which means that from the normal it is actually going to be a bit higher. What is this long period average? This is basically a 50-year average period which we actually calculate that how much rain has taken place in the last 50 years, and in comparison to that, what will be the rain this year? This will be 106%. What are the factors which will actually aid the monsoon this year? The factors is, for example, onset of La Nina. Onset of La Nina is basically the cooling down of the central equatorial Pacific region. So here they will be created high pressure. Because it is high pressure here is India. So here will be automatically low pressure. So the wind will actually blow from this region, high pressure to low pressure. So good rainfall for our country. That will further aid the southwest monsoon. The second is a positive Indian Ocean dipole which takes place. Then the third is the below normal snow cover over the northern hemisphere. Remember these reasons which are actually aiding the climate or the monsoon rainfall in our country this year. But are these data all the time accurate? So that is what the article actually highlights about, that let's imagine yourself as a resident of Bombay. So you just looked at the kind of prediction of 8th July and you saw that as per the IMD prediction, there was not very heavy rainfall predicted by the IMD. So you planned a kind of a date with your friends or your loved ones. Now while you just went on the date on 8th of July, there took place around 260 mm of rainfall, and now you are stuck in the traffic of Bombay. So obviously you will be cursing the IMD. Now this has actually taken place a lot of times in the last decade as well. So for example, from 2011 to 2021, only 2 times the prediction of IMD has actually been accurate. Many of the times there has been actually quite deviation from the predictions which was done by IMD. The article actually provides that there are several reasons for the failures. The first can be that IMD model, it often fails to capture the extremely localized weather systems which take place, right? So for example, in a particular region, there can be a very extreme heating of a particular land, thus creating a lot of low pressure at the ground level. And then obviously the rising of the air, just intensification or the condensation of that can ultimately lead to rainfall in that particular region. So on such localized weather phenomena, the IMD does not have that much of control. The reason for that obviously can be that we do not have got enough Doppler weather radar systems or automatic weather stations in all the localities. The second is that if we just talk specifically in the context of Bombay, it has proximity to both sea and the Western Ghats. So that makes it weather prone to rapid changes, which makes the forecast challenging. The third is that because of the climate change, there are taking place extreme weather events. For example, in 2023, in a place in China, there took place 1 year of rainfall on a single day. So how you can even predict such kind of a weather? The fourth is that weather science is actually inherently unpredictable, especially when the forecast is more specific over a smaller area. There are certain other reasons as well. For example, when we are calculating this southwest monsoon, we also have to rely on the data for the Indo-Pacific region, and that is provided by the international agencies such as, for example, the IMD. So when this IMD or IMO is providing these data to us, many of the time those data are not actually accurate. The second reason, which was highlighted in another article in the Hindu, that was that because of the data interpretations, there can be mistakes in that as well. So there are several other reasons as well. Now there is another interesting section which has been featured in the today's newspaper, and that is the IMD color codes. Remember that UPSC has asked the color codes for the cyclones in the mains examination in PYQs. So we are going to learn about the color codes which are launched by the Indian Meteorological Department for the rainfall. The first is yellow, that is issued in the likelihood of heavy rain, that is between 64 mm to 115 mm. The second is orange, that is alert or be prepared. It is issued in the likelihood of very heavy rain, that is above 115 mm of rainfall up to 204. The third is a red alert, which is released or issued when there is taking place a rainfall of more than 204 mm. So remember these color codes for your prelims and mains examination as well, and we move forward to the next news, where we are going to talk about a scheme which has been launched recently by the West Bengal government called as Rattirer Sathi. The scheme, which has been launched in the wake of criticism to ensure the workplace safety for women. We are going to cover such government policies and schemes under your prelims examination perspective. Now the question arises that does central government has such any particular scheme or initiative for the protection of women? Yes, absolutely. That is Prevention of Sexual Harassment Act of 2013, which actually aims to curb down the sexual harassment which is faced by the women at the workplace. And this was devised under the Vishakha judgment of 1997, which was launched by the Supreme Court, which actually put down several guidelines. And then those guidelines were enacted by the central government in the year of 2013. You might wonder why it took place such a long gap of 17 years. The reason for that is that obviously remember if we were talking about the calamity occurred action triggered approach. So when Nirbhaya case took place, the government came up with this act. The act actually puts a legal obligation on the employer to prevent and just secure the woman in the office workplace and make sure that such harassment does not take place. To do which, let's say if you are an organization and you are employing more than 10 workers, then there will take place a creation of an internal complaint committee. This internal complaint committee will comprise of minimum of 4 members and at least 50% of them shall be women. So let's say if I faced any kind of sexual harassment at a workplace, I will just complain to this particular committee. This particular committee will sit and will try to analyze all the circumstances. Now, there is also a provision for conciliation or mediation here. But if I am not satisfied with the kind of the verdict which has been given by this internal complaint committee, which also has the nature of a civil court, then obviously I can complain to the police. Now the question arises, what about the domestic workers? Remember that the domestic workers are also included in this Prevention of Sexual Harassment Act 2013. Now there are several schemes which has been launched by the state government, so just remember them from your prelims perspective. There is your Mission Shakti which has been launched by the Uttar Pradesh government, the Rattirer Sathi recently launched by the West Bengal government in the wake of the criticism it is facing because of the heinous crime which has taken place. The third is the Mahila Salah Suraksha Yojana, which is in the state of Rajasthan, and the Women Empowerment Fund which has been launched by Tamil Nadu to help the victims of such sexual harassment or sexual assaults. So remember this. We move forward to the next section of the news, where we are going to cover some very interesting and important news which can actually help you to eliminate some important statements in your prelims examination. The first is about the immortal Subhash Chandra Bose. Why immortal? Because the acts of valor and his efforts to get independence for our country actually remains rent-free in our heart and mind. Why Subhash Chandra Bose has been in the news or Netaji has been in the news? Because his family is actually demanding to bring back his remains from the country of Japan. Remember that Subhash Chandra Bose is claimed to have been died in the region of Taipei where his plane crashed. Now just a brief overlook about Subhash Chandra Bose. He passed his Indian Civil Services examination in the year of 1990. But at the same time, there was non-cooperation movement which was taking place in our country. So he just left his civil services and joined the non-cooperation movement. Then, in the year of 1923, he was elected as the leader of All India Youth Congress. And then, if you guys can remember, from the year of 1928, he played a very prominent role not only in the formation of the Motilal Nehru report, but also in the Independence for India League, which was formed with the efforts of Subhash Chandra Bose and Jawaharlal Nehru. Then in 1930, he became the mayor of Calcutta and he played a very prominent role in the civil disobedience movement. In 1938, he accepted the nomination as the INC presidential candidate. Obviously, he won. Can you guys just name in the comment box that which was the first session which was actually held by Subhash Chandra Bose as the president of Indian National Congress? And just being the president of Indian National Congress, he also, in the year of 1939, formed the National Economic Planning Committee, whose chairman was made Jawaharlal Nehru. And this economic planning committee actually became the base for the 5-year plan or the planning committee which came in the later years. Then in 1943, he took the command of the Indian National Army. In 1943, he declared an independent India at the Port Blair and Andaman and Nicobar Islands. And in 1943, he attended the foundation stone laying ceremony for the INA War Memorial in the region of Singapore. After which, obviously, the defeat of the Germany takes place in the year of 1945, and there is a plane crash which takes place, under which he just mysteriously disappeared. The second news is about the monkeypox, which is repeatedly in the news. What it is basically a viral disease. A viral disease which actually spreads from skin to skin contact or to having a sexual intercourse with a person who is infected by the mpox, or to establish any direct contact with any kind of rashes from a person who is suffering. So remember that it is kind of a communicable disease which can be passed from one person to a person, and there are various symptoms of this particular disease which has been repeatedly in the news. Just keep an eye on this disease for the further developments. The third news is about the Jew pharmacognosy. What is this concept? This concept is basically, just imagine yourself as an animal. So as an animal, I do not obviously have the facility to access the telemedicine, to dial the doctor and tell me that, what shall be the medicine which I should take for the cough which I am having. What these animals do, they actually use the various roots, leaves and plants as actually medical purposes. For example, this picture became very much viral where this Sumatran orangutan actually applied the Akar Kuni plant on his wounds for the healing purposes, because this Akar Kuni plant formed in the region of Indonesia has actually got antimicrobial and wound healing properties just like the shrub aloe vera or gawar patra in our country. Then there is animals, they use these kind of plants, shrubs and various other techniques for self-medication, such as for example the use of root, leaves and plants by apes, monkeys, reindeers, bears, etc. Or the chewing grass and vomiting by the dogs, so they just clear all the various kind of virus and bacteria in their stomach. Or for example, the pregnant lemurs, they actually feed on tamarind leaves to aid the milk production during the time of pregnancy and after that. Then we'll talk about, as the last news of the day, the line of control. The line of control, it actually came into the existence in the year of 1948 as per the ceasefire agreement which was signed by the United Nations between India and Pakistan. And this line of control which you guys can see here, which forms from here, the line of control, it goes till here, the region of Aksai Chin actually, till your Siachen glaciers. This was actually officially recognized in the Shimla Agreement of the year 1972. This is the region of illegally occupied region of Kashmir which has been occupied by the Pakistan. And this is where the line of actual control lies. So just remember that the crown of our head has actually been surrounded by the two nuclearly powered countries. With this, we have reached to the end of our discussion today. Do not forget to attempt the questions at the end of the video and test your knowledge. We will meet in a very interesting discussion very soon. Till then, all the very best for your preparation and thank you.